The Federal Bureau of Control was not created to understand the impossible, not really. It was created to file it, to label it, to lock it behind concrete walls. To give it a case number, a containment procedure, a security clearance, and a redacted paragraph in a report no ordinary person would ever read. That is the first joke of control. A secret government agency discovers that reality is stranger than anyone imagined, and its first instinct is paperwork. But control is not simply making fun of bureaucracy. It is asking a darker question. What happens when humanity meets forces that do not care about human categories? What happens when a door opens into something older than law, science, language, or architecture? What happens when the people responsible for containing the impossible begin to believe that naming something is the same as controlling it? That is the real story of control. A bureau built to contain paranormal events. A headquarters that is itself alive, shifting, and impossible. A director chosen by a weapon that may not be a weapon. A woman searching for her brother. A hostile resonance that infects thought. A janitor who may understand more than anyone. A mysterious board that speaks like a god. A corporation and a broken translation machine at the same time. And at the center of it all, Jesse Faden. A woman who walks into the impossible, not because she wants power, but because the impossible took her family first. At first, Control looks like the story of Jesse becoming director of the Federal Bureau of Control. But that is only the surface. The deeper story is about a bureau that spent decades trying to contain forces beyond human comprehension, only for those forces to reveal that the bureau itself was never truly in control. Full spoilers ahead for Control, including the Foundation and AW expansions. This is the story of Jesse Faden, Dylan Faden, Polaris, The Hiss, The Oldest House, The Board, The Service Weapon, Director Trench, Dr. Darling, the Federal Bureau of Control, and the building where every locked door is really a question. Can the impossible ever be contained, or does containment only give humanity the illusion of control? Before Jesse Faden arrives in New York, before she finds the oldest house, before the Hiss invasion turns bureau employees into floating bodies and distorted voices, the world of control already has rules, not normal rules. Paranatural rules. The first rule is this: reality is not stable. Most people live as if the world is solid. A chair is a chair. A house is a house. A gun is a gun. A slide projector is a slide projector. A refrigerator is a refrigerator. A rubber duck is a rubber duck. But in control, ordinary objects can become something else. Objects can gather meaning. A collective idea can attach itself to a physical thing. A childhood toy, a household appliance, a piece of technology, or an old ritual item can become altered by forces outside normal reality. The Bureau calls these altered items or objects of power. That language matters. The Bureau does not call them cursed relics. It does not call them magic. It does not call them holy. It calls them objects. Items, events, thresholds, paranatural phenomena. The Bureau's first act of control is vocabulary. If you can name something, you can write a protocol for it. If you can write a protocol, you can pretend it belongs inside the system. But the objects in control constantly expose the weakness of that system. A traffic light can control movement. A refrigerator can demand to be watched. A floppy disk can throw objects with deadly force. A slide projector can open doors to other dimensions. The Bureau sees these objects as anomalies. The game suggests something stranger. Maybe these objects are not breaking reality. Maybe they reveal that reality was always more symbolic, unstable, and negotiable than humanity wanted to admit. That is the second rule of control. Meaning has power. Not only physical power, cultural power, psychic power, ritual power. If enough human attention gathers around an idea, that idea can become a doorway. The Bureau studies this, but it never fully owns it. Because the Bureau itself is built from the same logic. Its headquarters, the oldest house, is not just a building. It is a place of power. A skyscraper in New York that ordinary people cannot perceive unless they are meant to find it. A brutalist office building that shifts inside. A building that contains impossible spaces, extra-dimensional thresholds, lost sectors, living rituals, and architecture that behaves like a thought process. The oldest house is the central symbol of control. It looks like the perfect headquarters for a government agency. Concrete. Desks. Elevators. Mailrooms, security checkpoints. Archives, research labs. Containment cells, executive offices. But inside, it is not a normal building at all. It is older than the Bureau. Stranger than the Bureau, possibly more important than the Bureau. The Bureau does not own the oldest house. It inhabits it. That difference is everything. The FBC thinks it found a headquarters. What it really found was a threshold that allowed itself to be used. The oldest house is the game's first great contradiction. The Bureau exists to contain the impossible, inside a building that proves the impossible is already containing the Bureau. This is why Control's setting is so powerful. Most supernatural stories place the impossible in haunted houses, forests, ruins, or forbidden temples. Control places it in an office. That makes the horror sharper. The impossible is not outside modern life. It is inside the filing cabinet. Inside the elevator, inside the meeting room, inside the employee handbook, inside the government agency that believes it can regulate what reality is allowed to do. This is where Jesse Faden enters the story. Jesse is not a Bureau agent. She's not a scientist. She's not a trained soldier. She's not a believer in the Bureau's mission. She's a survivor of something the Bureau failed to understand. Years before the main story, Jesse and her brother Dylan lived in Ordinary, a small town where an altered world event changed everything. The Ordinary AWE is the wound that creates Jesse's entire life. As children, Jesse and Dylan found a slide projector. At first, it was an object. Then it became a doorway. Each slide opened a connection to another world. And one of those worlds brought something impossible into Ordinary. Jesse and Dylan encountered Polaris, a resonance-based entity or presence that became connected to Jesse. They also encountered something dangerous. Something that would later be understood as connected to the Hiss. The children tried to handle a cosmic event with no language, no protection, and no adult understanding. Then the Bureau arrived, and this is where Jesse's story becomes different from the Bureau's version. For the FBC, Ordinary was an altered world event, a case, a site, a containment failure, a source of paranatural material, a child of interest, a future prime candidate. For Jesse, Ordinary was childhood trauma. Her town was changed. Her brother was taken. Her life was stolen by people who claimed to be protecting reality. This is the central conflict between Jesse and the Bureau. The Bureau looks at the impossible and sees data. Jesse looks at the same impossible and sees the moment her family was broken. That is why Jesse does not walk into the oldest house as a believer. She walks in as someone hunting the institution that took Dylan. She has spent years searching for the Bureau, years following a whisper inside her mind, years guided by Polaris, years being told by the world that what happened to her was not real, or not understandable, or not something she could ever expose. When she finally finds the oldest house, it is not because the building is easy to find, it is because the impossible has been calling her back. That is the third rule of Control. The impossible does not only happen to places, it marks people. Jesse is marked by Ordinary, Dylan is marked by Ordinary. Trench is marked by the slide projector. Darling is marked by Hedron. The Bureau is marked by every object it tries to classify. No one who touches the paranatural remains simply normal. The story begins when Jesse enters the oldest house and finds something already wrong. The building is in lockdown. The Bureau is under attack. The director, Zachariah Trench, is dead. Employees are floating in the air, chanting a distorted mantra. Others have become hostile. Reality inside the building has been invaded by a force called the Hiss. Jesse does not understand any of this yet, neither does the player. That is important. Control does not begin by explaining its world. It begins by forcing the player into a system already in collapse. This is the correct structure for the story. The Bureau is supposed to be the organization with answers. But when Jesse arrives, the answer givers are the ones infected, trapped, dead, or hiding behind emergency protocols. The experts have failed. The newcomer must walk through the wreckage of expertise. Then Jesse finds the service weapon. The service weapon is one of the most important symbols in the game. It appears as a gun, but it is clearly more than a gun. It is an object of power. It has chosen directors before. It is tied to the board. It changes form. It acts like a ritual object, a badge of office, a weapon, and a test. When Jesse picks it up, she passes the astral plane challenge and becomes the new director of the FPC. This moment should feel absurd. A woman walks into a secret government headquarters, finds the dead director, picks up a supernatural gun, and suddenly the Bureau recognizes her as its leader. But that absurdity is exactly the point. The Bureau looks like a modern institution, but its deepest authority is ritual. The director is not chosen by election, appointment, committee, or normal law. The director is chosen by an object. A gun connected to entities that speak through a pyramid in a white void. The Bureau may use badges and titles, but underneath it is closer to a temple. This is one of Control's strongest ideas. Modern bureaucracy is built on rituals. It pretends are rational. The service weapon reveals the Bureau's hidden religion. The board chooses. The director obeys. The hotline speaks. The house shifts. The rituals must be followed. The redactions are sacred. The thresholds are forbidden. And everyone acts like this is a workplace. Jesse becomes director before she understands what that title means. That is important. She does not earn the title through Bureau hierarchy. She earns it by surviving contact with the paranatural. The Bureau's old system is broken, so the impossible appoints an outsider. Jesse's first goal is still personal: find Dylan. But the building immediately gives her another role: stop the Hiss. Protect the survivors, restore order, answer the hotline, cleanse control points, find the people who understand what happened. And slowly, Jesse's private search becomes public responsibility. This is the first revealed chain of control. At first, Jesse thinks the Bureau is only the enemy that took her brother. Then she sees the Bureau is under attack. Then she realizes the Bureau is full of people, not only faceless agents. Then she discovers the Hiss is tied to the same cosmic history that shaped Ordinary. Then she learns Dylan is alive, but not free. Then she understands that being director may be the only way to save him and stop the invasion. The story does not erase Jesse's anger. It expands it. She comes to the oldest house to confront the Bureau. She ends up inheriting it. That inheritance is not clean. The FBC is fascinating because it is both necessary and dangerous. On one hand, the Bureau has done terrible things. It kidnaps, covers up, redacts, imprisons, experiments, hides information, and treats people as case assets. It took Dylan from Jesse. It made Ordinary into a file. It locked away objects and people under systems that often failed them. On the other hand, the world of control really does need someone to respond to altered world events. The fridge really can be dangerous. The slide projector really can open the door to catastrophe. The hiss really can infect minds. The oldest house really can become a doorway to something hostile. If the bureau disappears, the impossible does not become harmless. This is what makes control morally interesting. The bureau is not simply wrong to contain. But it is wrong to believe. Containment gives it moral innocence. This is the core tension Jesse inherits. The FBC may be necessary, but it must not be allowed to remain the same. Now, let's talk about the hiss. The H is one of the most disturbing enemies in modern game storytelling, because it is not just an army. It is a resonance, a frequency, a hostile pattern. It infects people through sound, thought, and vibration. Its victims chant phrases that feel like language destroyed from the inside. The hiss does not merely possess bodies. It colonizes meaning that makes it the perfect enemy for control. The Bureau's power is language classified. Name, redact. Contain, approve. Deny, file. The H attacks language itself. It turns speech into noise with intention. It makes human voices repeat a pattern that feels almost meaningful, but never resolves into ordinary meaning. It is a virus of reality and thought. The hiss reveals the Bureau's deepest fear, a force that cannot be negotiated with, cannot be fully translated, cannot be contained by a document, and cannot be reasoned into compliance. The Bureau is built on procedure. The hiss is anti-processure. The Bureau wants hierarchy. The hiss turns hierarchy into chorus. The Bureau wants employees to follow orders. The hiss makes every infected person repeat the same psychic order forever. That is why the floating employees are so haunting. They are not simply dead or possessed. They are office workers turned into a choir of contamination. The workplace itself becomes a ritual chamber. The hiss also works as a dark mirror of Polaris. Both are resonance-based forces. Both enter human perception. Both can connect to people. Both are not physical in a simple way, but Polaris guides Jesse while preserving her identity. The hiss overwhelms identity. This is the contrast. Polaris is connection. The hiss is invasion. Polaris speaks with Jesse in a way that feels intimate, protective, and mysterious. The hiss speaks through everyone in the same corrupted pattern. Polaris helps Jesse remain herself. The hiss turns people into receivers. That is why Jesse can fight the hiss. She is not immune because she is strong in a normal heroic sense. She is protected by a different resonance. Her relationship with Polaris is the hidden reason she can enter the house, take the service weapon, cleanse objects, and resist the invasion. But Polaris is not fully explained at first. And that matters. For much of the game, Polaris is Jesse's secret, her guide, her friend, her internal compass. The Bureau would probably call Polaris an entity, a paranatural influence, a resonance, or a subject of study. Jesse experiences Polaris differently. Not as an experiment, as someone who helped her survive. This difference is crucial. The Bureau studies the paranatural from outside. Jesse lives with it from inside. That makes Jesse a new kind of director. She is not simply a manager of anomalies. She is a person whose identity was shaped by one. Now, Dr. Casper Darling. Darling is the Bureau's face of research. He appears through videos, presentations, explanations, warnings, and increasingly strange recordings. At first, he feels like the Bureau's charming science teacher. He explains altered items. He explains Black Rock. He explains the HRA devices. He explains the oldest house in the language of research. But as the story progresses, Darling becomes one of the most tragic figures in the Bureau. He is brilliant. He is curious. He understands more than almost anyone. He is also part of the system that harmed Jesse and Dylan. This makes him complicated. Darling is not a cartoon villain. He is not the same kind of figure as Trench. He seems genuinely fascinated by the truth and genuinely afraid of the hiss. But his science still exists inside an institution that treats people and objects as things to manage. His work on Hedron and the HRA devices becomes essential to resisting the hiss. Without Darling's research, the Bureau might have fallen completely. But his research also came from dangerous contact with the unknown. Darling's arc is about the scientist approaching transcendence or collapse. As he studies Hedron, he becomes changed. His final messages suggest he moves beyond normal physical presence. He vanishes into the mystery he spent his life studying. This is thematically perfect. The Bureau wants science to master the impossible. Darling shows the opposite. The closer science gets to the impossible, the more the scientist may be transformed by it. Darling does not contain the unknown. He is absorbed into its meaning. Now, Hedron. Hedron is one of the game's most important sources of truth. The Bureau finds Hedron through the slide projector and connects it to the resonance that protects against the hiss. Darling uses Hedron to create Hedron Resonance Amplifiers, or HRAs. These devices protect Bureau personnel from his corruption. At first, Hedron seems like the source of Polaris, the protective resonance, the opposite of the hiss. But the deeper truth is more subtle. When Hedron is destroyed, Jesse believes Polaris may be gone. Then she realizes Polaris is still within her. This changes the meaning of the entire relationship. Polaris was not simply an external entity hiding in a container. Polaris had become part of Jesse, or Jesse had become a living channel for Polaris. The exact metaphysics remain intentionally mysterious, but the emotional meaning is clear. Jesse's protection was never only in the Bureau's lab. It was never only in Hedron's chamber, it was inside her. This is one of Control's strongest character reveals. Jesse spends the game moving through an institution that measures, labels, and contains power. Then she learns that her most important power cannot be reduced to the Bureau's container. The Bureau can study Hedron. It can build HRAs. It can write reports. But Jesse's bond with Polaris is personal, experiential, and alive. That is what the Bureau often fails to understand. Not every paranatural relationship is an object to store. Some are bonds. Now, Dylan Faden. Dylan is the emotional shadow of Jesse's story. He is what Jesse might have become if the Bureau had taken her instead. After Ordinary, the Bureau kidnaps Dylan and makes him a prime candidate. They do not raise him as a normal child. They study him, train him, contain him, fear him, hope he may become director. Dylan becomes both prisoner and experiment. That is why he is so important. Dylan is not simply Jesse's missing brother. He is the living evidence of what the Bureau does when it finds a child touched by the impossible. The Bureau tells itself Dylan is important, dangerous, special, a candidate, a security concern, a potential director. But those labels hide the human truth. Dylan was a child taken from his life and shaped by an institution that wanted to use him. By the time Jesse finds him, Dylan is not simply waiting to be saved. He is damaged, angry. Fragmented, connected to the hiss. Aware of things he should not know. He speaks like someone whose identity has been pulled between the Bureau, the hiss, his childhood, and the cosmic forces that touched Ordinary. Dylan's tragedy is that he knows too much and was loved too little. The Bureau tried to control him. The hiss tries to use him. Jesse tries to reach the brother she remembers. But Dylan is no longer only that boy. This is why the reunion is painful. Jesse's whole life has been shaped by the goal of finding Dylan. But finding Dylan does not restore the past. The Bureau did not freeze him in time, it changed him. The impossible changed him. Years of isolation changed him. This is one of Control's most honest emotional choices. The missing person is found, but the missing childhood is not. Jesse can find Dylan. She cannot simply undo what happened to him. Now, Director Trench. Trench is the old Bureau. He represents Control's paranoia. He was director before Jesse. He held the service weapon. He answered the hotline. He worked with Darling Marshall and the Bureau's leadership. He was the man responsible for the institution Jesse enters. But by the time the game begins, Trench is dead. His messages remain. His hotline echoes remain. His decisions remain. His damage remains. Trench is a ghost of authority. Through the hotline, Jesse hears him as a fragmented guide. But the more she learns, the clearer it becomes that Trench was compromised. The His entered through him. He was exposed to it through the slide projector situation. He became paranoid. He saw Hedron and Darling's research as threats. He believed he was protecting the Bureau. Then he opened the door. This is one of Control's most important reveals. The His invasion did not happen because the Bureau lacked protocols. It happened because the director, the central figure of authority, was infected by fear and distrust. Trench's failure is not only supernatural, it is institutional. The Bureau gave enormous power to a single director. It created secrecy even inside secrecy. It built structures where distrust could grow without challenge. It studied forces that could manipulate perception. Then it expected one man to remain perfectly stable at the center. Trench failed. But the Bureau's structure helped make that failure catastrophic. This is the critique of Control. A system obsessed with containment can become too close to notice contamination inside itself. Trench is not just a bad director. He is the Bureau's ideology collapsing. He wanted control so badly that he became the breach. Now, Helen Marshall. Marshall represents the Bureau's hard survival instinct. She is head of operations. She understands security, danger, threat response, and sacrifice. She is practical where Darling is theoretical. She is suspicious where Emily Pope is open. She does not immediately trust Jesse, and that makes sense. From Marshall's perspective, a stranger walks into the Bureau during an invasion, picks up the service weapon, and is suddenly director. That is exactly the kind of thing a security officer should question. Marshall's function is to show the Bureau's protective side without romanticizing it. The Bureau does need people like Marshall, people who act, people who prepare, people who understand that the impossible can kill if procedures fail. But Marshall's story also shows the cost of being shaped by containment culture. In the Foundation, her fear of the board and the His leads her into a desperate act. She damages the nail to prevent larger danger, but she is ultimately consumed by the His. Marshall is not stupid. She sees that the board may not be trustworthy. She recognizes that the Bureau's relationship with its higher powers is dangerous. But she still acts within a framework of secrecy and unilateral control. Her end shows that even necessary suspicion can become destructive when no one has full truth. Now, Emily Pope. Emily is important because she represents the Bureau that could change. She is a researcher. She is fascinated by the impossible. But unlike many Bureau scientists, she responds to Jesse with curiosity, trust, and ethical warmth. She becomes one of Jesse's first real allies. Emily does not treat Jesse only as a subject. She treats her as a person and as director. This matters because Control's future depends on whether the Bureau can become less predatory without becoming useless. Emily suggests that it can. She is still a Bureau scientist. She still studies altered phenomena. She still wants to understand. But she is open to Jesse's perspective. She can adapt. She can believe what older bureau structures might dismiss. She is the seed of a healthier FBC. That is why Jesse and Emily's relationship matters. Jesse does not destroy the bureau. She needs people inside it who can help make it better. Emily is one of those people. Now, Ahi. Ahi may be the most mysterious character in Control, and that is saying something. On the surface, he is the janitor. He gives Jesse directions. He speaks in strange idioms. He seems unconcerned by the bureau's hierarchy. He refers to Jesse as his assistant. He knows paths through the oldest house that others do not. He sends Jesse into the maintenance sector. He gives her the cassette player that allows her to cross the ashtray maze. He appears to understand the house in a way no director or scientist fully does. Ahi's function is crucial. He is the anti-bureau. The bureau tries to understand the oldest house through classification, clearance, and research. IT understands it through work, ritual, familiarity, and strange authority. He does not need to explain the house. He tends to it. That may be more important. In many mythologies, janitors, caretakers, ferrymen, and gatekeepers know more than kings. Ahi fits that role. He is humble in job title, cosmic in implication. He may be connected to ancient mythic forces, but the game does not reduce him to a simple explanation. That is wise. Ahi's mystery works because it resists bureau logic. If the FBC could fully classify Ahi, he would stop being Ahi. He exists to remind the player that some forces are not mastered by being named. The janitor may know the building better than the director. That is the kind of world Control creates. Now, the board. The board is one of the game's most brilliant creations. It communicates from the astral plane through strange, doubled language. It speaks like a committee, a god, a bureaucracy, a corporate entity, and a translation error. It appoints directors. It controls or claims the service weapon. It offers power. It gives Jesse instructions. It refers to enemies, objects, and duties in language that always feels slightly wrong. The board is powerful, but not necessarily trustworthy. This is important. At first, the board seems like the highest authority behind the bureau, a strange but necessary guiding force. But as the story continues, the board becomes more suspicious. It is not fully aligned with Jesse's humanity. It has its own agenda. It hides information. It uses ritual and hierarchy. It speaks in terms of approval and rejection. In the Foundation, the board's conflict with the former becomes more visible. The Foundation reveals that the board is not the only power connected to the astral plane and the oldest house. It may not be the rightful owner of everything it claims. This changes the meaning of the main game retroactively. When Jesse becomes director through the service weapon, is she freely chosen or recruited into the board structure? When the board grants powers, is it helping her or binding her? When the bureau serves the board, is it containing the impossible or acting as a human arm of an impossible authority? Control never gives a simple answer, and that is the point. The board is not the hiss. It is not the obvious enemy, but it is also not safe. The board represents control above control. The authority behind the authority. The voice that tells the bureau what power's legitimate. Jesse's growth as director depends on realizing that she cannot simply replace Strange and obey the same invisible masters. She has to lead differently. Now, the former appears first as a strange enemy connected to altered items and side encounters. It is a massive one-eyed entity in the astral plane. At first, it seems like another monster, but the Foundation complicates it. The former may be an exiled member or rival of the board. It offers Jesse power when the board withholds it. It may have its own agenda, but it also helps reveal that the board's version of reality is not complete. The former's function is to destabilize the board's authority. If the board has enemies, exiles, or internal conflicts, then the Bureau's highest power is not absolute. That matters because control is about hierarchy. The Bureau has departments. Departments have directors. Directors answer to the board. But the Foundation shows that the hierarchy itself is contested. The world is not a clean pyramid. It is a struggle between forces the Bureau barely understands. Jesse begins as someone looking for her brother. By the end of the Foundation, she is someone who knows the Bureau's cosmic chain of command may be compromised. That is a major shift. Now, let's talk about the sectors of the oldest house. The oldest house is not a normal map. Each sector is an organ of the Bureau's worldview. Central Executive represents authority. It is where leadership, administration, survivors, and the director's office are located. When Jesse first stabilizes Central Executive, she creates the first pocket of order inside the invasion. That is not just gameplay. It is symbolism. A new director restores the center, but only temporarily. Maintenance represents the hidden infrastructure. Power plants, cooling systems, janitor routes, power converters, pipes, furnaces, and the unseen labor that makes the Bureau function. This is where AT belongs. This sector reminds us that cosmic institutions still need someone to keep the lights on. Research represents the Bureau's curiosity. Labs, experiments, parapsychology, resonance studies, thresholds, plants, models, and theories. This is Darling's world. It is where the Bureau tries to make the impossible legible. Containment represents fear, objects locked away. Prosputures, panopticon cells. Altered items under surveillance, danger categorized and stacked. It is one of the purest expressions of the Bureau's mission. The investigation sector, explored in AWE, represents memory and buried cases. The Bureau's abandoned history. Files that were sealed not because they stopped mattering, but because containment failed too badly. The Foundation represents the ancient root beneath the Bureau. The place below the building's bureaucratic surface, the oldest part of the oldest house. The place where the board's connection to the house becomes more questionable. Together, the sectors create the meaning of the game. Control is not a story where levels are just places. Each sector shows a way the Bureau tries to control reality. Lead it, maintain it, study it, contain it, archive it, build on it. And each sector fails in its own way when the hiss enters. That is brilliant environmental storytelling. The building becomes the Bureau's mind under attack. Now, the Ocean View Motel. The Ocean View Motel is one of the most mysterious recurring spaces in Remedy's universe. In Control, it appears as a threshold space. A place Jesse enters to move between impossible locations. It looks ordinary. A motel hallway, rooms, a front desk, a bell, keys, light switches, symbols on doors. But it is clearly not normal. The motel functions as a liminal space. A place between places, a ritual interface for the impossible. The Bureau uses it, but does not fully understand it. That is important. The Ocean View Motel is another reminder that the FBC can develop procedures for something without understanding its nature. Pull the cord 3 times. Enter the motel, solve the ritual, open the right door, return somewhere else. The Bureau can use the pattern, but use is not mastery. This is one of Control's repeated lessons. Humans can interact with the paranatural through ritual before they fully comprehend it. In fact, ritual may be the only safe way to interact with it. That makes the Bureau less like a science agency than it wants to admit. It is also an occult institution with fluorescent lights. Now, let's talk about the Ashtray Maze. The Ashtray Maze is one of the most iconic sequences in the game. Because it combines everything control is about: impossible architecture, a ritual object, a his guidance. Music as power, Jesse's confidence. The service weapon, the oldest house shifting around her. The moment feels like pure empowerment, but it is also thematically precise. For much of the game, Jesse is reacting. She enters a crisis. She follows the hotline. She searches for Dylan. She learns the Bureau's rules. She cleanses control points. She survives. But the ashtray maze is where Jesse feels fully synchronized with the impossible. The building shifts and she moves with it. The music plays and reality becomes rhythm. The maze is not conquered through Bureau protocol. It is crossed through artist cassette, trust, and Jesse's growing comfort with the oldest house. That is why the sequence matters so much. It shows Jesse becoming the right kind of director. Not someone who dominates the house, but someone who can move with its strangeness. The old Bureau might try to map the maze, classify it, seal it, assign clearance, and write an incident report. Jesse takes the cassette and walks through. That is a different relationship to the impossible. Not careless, not submissive, responsive. Now, the fake-off is nightmare near the end. After Hedron is destroyed and Jesse nearly loses Polaris, the Hiss traps her in a distorted version of bureaucratic reality. She becomes an assistant. She performs meaningless office tasks. She receives nonsense assignments. She is buried in the absurdity of institutional routine. This sequence is easy to overlook, but it is one of the most important thematic moments in the game. The Hiss does not only attack Jesse with monsters, it attacks her with the Bureau's own structure. It turns work into a prison. It makes control feel like endless, meaningless compliance. Jesse is not trapped in a battlefield. She is trapped in an office nightmare. That is perfect for control. The horror of the Bureau is not only cosmic, it is administrative. Forms, tasks, approval, hierarchy, pointless repetition. Being told what your role is. Being reduced to a worker inside a system that does not care about your personhood. For Jesse to break free, she has to reclaim herself. She has to realize Polaris is not gone. She has to reject the false role. She has to become director not as a title assigned by the system, but as a choice. That is the emotional climax before the final fight. Jesse's real power is not the service weapon, not launch, not levitation, not the hotline. Her real power is that the Hiss cannot fully define her. It cannot overwrite the bond she carries inside. Now, the ending of the main game. Jesse reaches Dylan. The Hiss is stopped from fully spreading. Dylan falls into a coma. The Bureau survives. The lockdown remains in some form. The oldest house is not suddenly normal. The Hiss is not erased from every corner. Darling is gone. Trench is dead. Marshall is missing. The board is still ambiguous. The Bureau is damaged. And Jesse is director. This is not a clean, happy ending. It is a beginning. That is exactly right. Because control is not about destroying the impossible. It is about accepting responsibility for a world where the impossible exists. Jesse does not get Dylan back in the way she hoped. She does not expose the Bureau to the public. She does not walk away. She does not solve every mystery. Instead, she takes the chair. But the meaning of taking the chair has changed. At the start, director is a title given by the service weapon and recognized by the Bureau. At the end, director becomes Jesse's commitment. She chooses to lead. And that choice matters because Jesse is not Trench. She knows what it is like to be a victim of the Bureau. She knows what it is like to be touched by the paranatural without becoming a file. She knows the Bureau is necessary and broken. She knows the board may not deserve blind obedience. She knows control is not the same as understanding. That makes her the only person who might change the FBC from inside. Now, the Foundation. The Foundation expansion is essential because it asks what the Bureau is built on. Literally and symbolically, Jesse is called beneath the oldest house to the Foundation, where the nail is damaged and the stability of the house is threatened. The board demands action. Marshall's path is revealed. The former becomes more important. Jesse gains new powers connected to shaping or breaking crystals. At first, this sounds like another crisis. But thematically, it is about foundations in every sense. The Bureau's physical foundation, the board's authority, Jesse's trust, Marshall's fear, the relationship between the house, the nail, the board, and the director. This expansion changes Jesse's position. In the main game, she becomes director and fights the hiss. In the Foundation, she begins questioning the powers behind the director. That is a major step. The board tries to frame events in a way that protects its own authority. The former complicates that frame. Marshall's actions suggest that someone inside the Bureau recognized the board itself could be dangerous. Jesse sees that the hiss is not the only threat. The structure of power above the Bureau may also be unstable. This is exactly where a sequel setup should go. First, Jesse inherits the Bureau. Then she questions what the Bureau serves. The Foundation's final meaning is this: the director must protect the oldest house, but she must not become a puppet of the board. Jesse vows to lead the Bureau her own way. That is her true transition from chosen director to independent director. Now, AWE. A-Way expands the world sideways instead of downward. The Foundation goes beneath the Bureau. A way goes into its sealed history. The investigation sector was the part of the Bureau that studied altered world events. It is abandoned because of a containment breach involving Dr. Emil Hartman, a character tied to the Bright Falls incident from Alan Wake. Hartman tried to exploit the power of Cauldron Lake. After contact with the Dark Presence and later the Hiss, he becomes something monstrous. Jesse enters the investigation sector and confronts the consequences of a case the Bureau failed to contain. This expansion is important for 3 reasons. First, it shows that the FBC's failures are not limited to Ordinary or the Hiss. The Bureau has a long history of dangerous containment mistakes. Second, it connects Control to Alan Wake, confirming that the Remedy universe is not just thematically connected, but paranaturally linked. Bright Falls is an AWE. Cauldron Lake is a threshold where art can rewrite reality. The Bureau has files on it. Alan Wake's nightmare is part of the same world Jesse now directs. Third, AWE suggests that stories themselves may influence Bureau events. Alan's presence in the expansion creates disturbing questions about authorship, causality, and whether parts of Jesse's crisis may have been shaped by Alan's attempt to escape the dark place. This has to be handled carefully. The strongest reading is not Alan created everything in Control. That would weaken Jesse's story and overstate what the game confirms. The better reading is Alan may have influenced or nudged events through writing, especially around the AWE sector and the crisis needed for a hero, but the FBC, the oldest house, Jesse, the Hiss, and the Bureau's history are not reduced to Alan's imagination. This distinction matters. Control must remain Jesse's story. AWA connects it to Alan Wake, but does not erase its identity. The expansion's final hook points toward future events in Bright Falls. For players who later experience Alan Wake 2, this becomes even more meaningful. But within Control, AWE's main function is to show that the Bureau's world is bigger than the Bureau. The FBC may have files on Bright Falls, but files do not equal mastery. Again, the lesson repeats. The Bureau can record the impossible. It cannot fully own it. Now, let's return to Jesse and Dylan, because their story is the emotional core. The FBC sees Jesse and Dylan as prime candidates, potential directors. children affected by a major paranatural event. But the game asks us to see them as siblings first. Two children in ordinary. Two survivors of an event no one else could understand. Two lives split by the Bureau. Jesse escapes with Polaris. Dylan is taken and raised inside the institution. That split creates the game's deepest mirror. Jesse is the paranatural survivor outside the Bureau. Dylan is the paranatural survivor inside the Bureau. Jesse grows up haunted by questions. Dylan grows up imprisoned by answers. Jesse's connection to Polaris helps her preserve identity. Dylan's exposure to the Bureau and the Hiss fractures his identity. Jesse enters the oldest house voluntarily, even if guided. Dylan never had that choice. This is why Dylan cannot simply become the villain. He is dangerous, yes. He is connected to the Hiss. He says frightening things. He may be used as a conduit. But he is also the Bureau's victim. The tragedy is not that Jesse's brother became evil. The tragedy is that the Bureau tried to make him into an instrument before he could become a person. This is why Jesse becoming director is emotionally complicated. She becomes head of the institution that took her brother. That could feel like betrayal. But it also gives her the chance to prevent the Bureau from doing the same thing again. Her leadership is built from the wound the Bureau caused. That is powerful. Now, what is Polaris? We need to be careful. Control intentionally leaves Polaris mysterious. Polaris is a resonance entity, or presence, connected to Jesse through the ordinary Ewa and Hedron. Polaris helps Jesse resist the Hiss. Polaris guides her to the oldest house. Polaris is experienced by Jesse as an intimate companion, but whether Polaris is fully separate, fully internal, a resonance pattern, a fragment of Hedron, or something that became part of Jesse is left open. The game gives evidence, but not a simple scientific definition. That ambiguity is good, because Polaris works best as both cosmic force and emotional relationship. For Jesse, Polaris is the voice that believed her when no one else did. The presence that guided her when she was alone, the one connection to ordinary that was not taken by the Bureau. When Jesse thinks Polaris is gone, she almost collapses. When she realizes Polaris is still within her, she becomes whole in a new way. That is the emotional truth, even if the metaphysical details remain uncertain. Polaris is not just power. Polaris is Jesse's proof that she was never completely alone. Now the Hiss chant. The Hiss chant is one of the most important pieces of writing in Control. It is fragmented, poetic, threatening, absurd, religious, corporate, spikic. It feels like a language virus. The exact phrases vary, but the function is consistent. The Hiss turns language into occupation. This matters because the Bureau's world is full of official language, redacted reports, classified files, training videos, research terminology, containment protocols. The Hiss chant is the corrupted double of Bureau language. Both repeat, both structure thought, both reduce the individual inside a system, but Bureau language pretends to protect meaning. The Hiss chant divorces meaning openly. This is why Control's writing style works so well. It is not just weird for weirdness. The language itself is the battleground. Who gets to define the impossible? The Bureau, the board, the Hiss, Jesse, the documents, the voices, the player. Every file in Control is part of that war. Now let's talk about documents and redactions. Control's lore is delivered through case files, memos, research reports, multimedia presentations, hotline messages, threshold logs, and redacted documents. This is not optional flavor. It is the Bureau's worldview as text. The redactions are especially important. They show what the Bureau hides, but they also create mystery. A redacted report is not absence, it is controlled absence. It tells the reader, there is truth here, but you are not allowed to have all of it. That makes the player feel like an outsider inside a secret agency. Even as director, Jesse enters an institution whose knowledge is fragmented, restricted, and often damaged. The Bureau tried to control the impossible by controlling information. But during the Hiss invasion, the documents become relics of failed certainty. You read the protocol, after the thing it was supposed to prevent has already happened. You read a containment procedure in a room where containment failed. You read a confident research note beside the consequences of overconfidence. This is environmental irony. The documents are not just lore. They are evidence in a case against the Bureau's arrogance. Now, what is the main reveal chain of control? First, Jesse believes the Bureau is the institution that took Dylan. Then she discovers the Bureau is under attack by the Hiss. This changes her mission from revenge or recovery into crisis response. Second, she becomes director through the service weapon. This changes her from outsider to unwilling authority. Third, she learns the Hiss is connected to the slide projector and ordinary. This connects the current invasion to her childhood trauma. Fourth, she finds Dylan alive but compromised. These changes rescue from a simple reunion into a confrontation with the damage the Bureau caused. Fifth, she learns Trench was compromised and opened the door to the Hiss. This changes the invasion from external accident to internal failure. Sixth, she learns Hedron may not be the full source of Polaris. This changes her understanding of power from external protection to internal resonance. Seventh, she survives the Hiss's attempt to overwrite her. This changes her from chosen director to self-realize the director. Eighth, the Foundation reveals the board may not be trustworthy. This changes the Bureau's hierarchy from stable to suspect. Ninth hour reveals the Bureau's cases connect to broader reality-bending forces like Cauldron Lake. This changes the FBC from the center of the impossible to one institution inside a much larger universe. That is the story's knowledge path. Not Jesse goes to each sector and fights enemies. But Jesse moves through layers of institutional failure until she understands the Bureau must be led differently. Now, what is the meaning of the title? Control. It refers to the Federal Bureau of Control. It refers to the Bureau's mission. It refers to the player's telekinetic powers. It refers to containment. It refers to authority. It refers to Jesse taking control of her life. It refers to the Hiss trying to control minds. It refers to the board controlling directors. It refers to the oldest house resisting control. The title is a question disguised as a noun. Who has control? The Bureau? The board? The Hiss? Jesse? Polaris? The oldest house? The player? Every time the game answers, it complicates the answer. The Bureau controls objects until containment fails. The board controls the service weapon until Jesse questions it. The Hiss controls minds until Jesse resists it. Jesse controls powers granted through objects of power, but those powers come from forces she did not create. The oldest house is used by the Bureau, but it shifts beyond Bureau command. Control is always partial, always unstable, always negotiated. That is the final meaning. The Bureau's mistake was believing control could be absolute. Jesse's strength is learning that control must become responsibility instead. Now, let's look at the Bureau as a character. The FBC is not just a setting or faction. It has personality, paranoid, brilliant, cruel, funny, necessary, absurd, terrified, curious, authoritarian, underfunded in some places, overpowered in others. Full of people doing their jobs inside a building that might eat the laws of physics. The Bureau is compelling because it is both monstrous and human. Yes, it kidnaps children and hides truth. But it is also full of employees who complain about coffee, write memos, argue over protocols, make training videos, misplace objects, and try to survive a job that involves cosmic horror. That mixture is important. If the Bureau were only evil, Jesse taking over would feel wrong. If it were only heroic, Dylan's story would lose power. Instead, the Bureau is a flawed institution built around a real problem. The impossible exists. Someone must respond. But the way they respond matters. Control is not anti-institution in a simple way. It is anti-unaccountable institution. It is not saying the paranatural should be ignored. It is saying containment without humility becomes another threat. That is why Jesse's perspective is necessary. She brings lived experience to a Bureau dominated by observation. She knows what it is like to be on the other side of the file. Now let's talk about objects of power as character tests. Each object of power gives Jesse an ability, but first it tests her. The floppy disk gives launch. The hotline gives communication with dead directors and the board. The merry-go-round horse gives evade. The X-ray light box gives seize. The Benikoff TV gives levitate. These objects are not just upgrades. They are contracts. They pull Jesse into the astral plane. They force her to prove compatibility. They connect her to the board's structure. Each power makes Jesse more capable of fighting the hiss. But each power also deepens her involvement with the Bureau's paranatural hierarchy. This is another control contradiction. Jesse needs power to survive, but power in the oldest house is never neutral. It comes with connection, with attention, with obligation, with the board watching. That is why Jesse's growing power is not only empowerment fantasy. It is also initiation. She is being shaped into director by the same system she needs to question. The service weapon is the ultimate example. It helps her. It chooses her. It also binds her to the director role. Jesse must learn to use the tools without becoming only the tool of the beings behind them. Now the astral plane. The astral plane is the white void where the board speaks, where Jesse is tested, and where ritual geometry replaces normal space. It is minimalist, bright, abstract, and alien in a completely different way from the hiss. The hiss feels like corruption, noise, red light, invasion. The astral plane feels like sterile authority. White platforms, black pyramids. Geometric, distance, commands without context. It is not comforting. It is just cleaner. That contrast matters. Control does not say light equals good and red equals bad in a simple way. The astral plane is not his corruption, but it is still unsettling. The board may oppose the hiss, but opposition does not equal benevolence. The astral plane represents an impossible order. The hiss represents impossible infection. Jesse is caught between them, trying to create a human form of leadership inside forces that are not human at all. This is why control is more complex than good resonance versus bad resonance. Polaris may be protective. The hiss is hostile. The board is useful but suspicious. The former may be dangerous but revealing. The oldest house may be shelter and threat. Every force must be judged by relationship and consequence, not appearance alone. Now, the ordinary AWE in more detail. Ordinary is the hidden origin story. The slide projector opens doors to other realities. Children explore it. A benign or protective resonance, Polaris enters Jesse's life. A hostile resonance linked to the hiss threatens them. The Bureau intervenes. Dylan is taken. The slide projector becomes a key object of cosmic significance. This event is the reason Jesse and Dylan become prime candidates. It is also the reason Trench later becomes vulnerable. The slide projector is dangerous because it turns curiosity into access. Each slide is a possible threshold. This is a brilliant image. A mundane childhood object becomes a cosmic doorway. It captures control's entire world. The impossible enters through ordinary forms, not through golden portals or ancient spellbooks. Through office objects, household objects, childhood objects, entertainment objects, that is the horror. Reality is not safe because the familiar is not safe. The Bureau can lock away the slide projector, but it cannot undo what it revealed. There are other worlds. Some of them can enter ours. Some of them can change us. Now, Trench and the slide projector. Trench's exposure to the hiss through the projector is the institutional infection point. He thinks he is protecting the Bureau from Hedron, from Darling, from a perceived threat. The hiss manipulates that fear. He opens the projector. The invasion begins. This is a perfect story mechanism because it makes the invasion both cosmic and psychological. The hiss needed a door. Trench's paranoia opened it. That means the Bureau's failure was not only technical. It was emotional. Fear was the vulnerability. Distrust was the vulnerability. Secrecy was the vulnerability. The director's isolation was the vulnerability. This is why Jesse can succeed where Trench failed. Not because she knows more. At first, she knows far less. But she has Polaris. She trusts the bond. She forms relationships with Emily, Arish, Ahi, and others. She listens more than Trench did. She experiences the Bureau from below and outside before leading it from above. Her leadership is less isolated. That matters. The hiss is defeated not by a perfect protocol, but by a person who refuses to be alone inside her own head. Now let's talk about Simon Arish. Arish is not one of the cosmic key figures, but he matters. He represents the ordinary Bureau employee trying to survive extraordinary events. He is a security officer, a soldier, a human presence inside the absurdity. Through Arish, the Bureau feels like a workplace full of people with relationships and fears, not only a faceless agency. His memories of Rangers, his reaction to losses, his practical support for Jesse, all of this grounds the story. Control needs characters like Arish, because otherwise the Bureau would become too abstract. The hiss invasion matters because real employees are being lost. Not only agents, people, coworkers, friends, teams. A good lore script should not forget that. The impossible is cosmic, but its damages is human. Now, Langston. Frederick Langston, the Panopticon supervisor, brings a different texture. He is bureaucratic, nervous, oddly charming, and responsible for monitoring dangerous altered items. He shows how normalized absurdity has become inside the Bureau. A fridge that must be watched is not a mythic curse to him. It is a workplace problem. An altered item escapes containment. File it, a dangerous object acts strangely. Follow procedure. Someone gets assigned to stare at a refrigerator. Tragic, but also another day at work. Langston embodies the surreal comedy of control. The Bureau survives by making the impossible routine. That is funny. It is also disturbing. Because when horror becomes routine, people can stop feeling the moral weight of it. This is another Bureau danger. Normalization is necessary for employees to function, but it can also make cruelty feel administrative. Now, let's talk about side stories briefly, because they support the main theme. The mold outbreak shows that the oldest house contains biological and extra-dimensional threats that can grow beyond containment. Underhill's research shows another scientist operating at the edge of Bureau control. The anchor, the traffic light, the mirror, the fridge, the rubber duck, the mannequin, the former encounters, these side cases build the world's logic. Each one says, the impossible is not one phenomenon, it is an ecosystem. The hiss is the main threat, but it is not the only threat. This is why the Bureau exists. The world is full of smaller impossibilities that can ruin lives if ignored, but each side case also shows that containment is fragile. A procedure can fail, a staff member can be sacrificed. A cell can break. An object can behave in ways no one predicted. The more files you read, the clearer the truth becomes. The Bureau is not a fortress around the impossible. It is a dam full of cracks. And Jesse arrives during the flood. Now, the hotline. The hotline is another key symbol. It connects the director to the board and to echoes of past directors. It is literally a red phone that is perfect. A familiar symbol of emergency authority becomes an object of power. The hotline lets Jesse receive messages from Trench. But those messages are fragmented, distorted, and symbolic. Past authority speaks, but never cleanly. That is Control's relationship to institutional history. Jesse can learn from Trench, but she cannot simply follow him. His voice is useful and compromised. The hotline also reinforces the idea that leadership in the Bureau is haunted. A director is never alone. The board watches. The former director echoes. The service weapon tests. The house responds. The title carries ghosts. When Jesse becomes director, she inherits not only authority, but the voices of those who failed before her. Now, what does Jesse actually want? At the beginning, she wants Dylan. That is the emotional engine. But Jesse also wants validation. She wants proof that she was not crazy. She wants the world to admit that ordinary happened. She wants the Bureau to answer for what it did. Polaris has guided her, but the ordinary world has not believed her. When she enters the oldest house, she enters the place where her impossible childhood is finally documented. But documentation is not justice. The Bureau has proof, but the proof is locked away. Files exist, but they are redacted. Her trauma has been real all along, but the institution that knows it also caused more of it. This is painful. Jesse finds the truth and discovers the truth is morally insufficient. That is why she cannot simply take the files and leave. The Bureau's knowledge must be changed into responsibility. That is her real arc. Now, what does Dylan want? Dylan's desires are harder to separate from the hiss and from years of damage. But at the core, Dylan wants freedom, recognition, and release from being a subject. He resents Jesse because she escaped. He resents the Bureau because it imprisoned him. He resents the roles assigned to him. He has been called P6, Prime Candidate, Potential Director, Threat, Subject. Even his name is not always treated as his own. The Edge offers him a terrible kind of freedom, a way out of Bureau containment. A voice larger than his cell, but it is not true freedom. It is another possession. That is Dylan's tragedy. The Bureau controlled him through containment. The Hiss controls him through resonance. Both deny him ordinary personhood. Jesse's hope is to reach Dylan beneath those systems. The ending leaves him in a coma, which is painful because the emotional resolution is incomplete. That is appropriate. Control is not a fairy tale where finding the missing brother solves everything. Jesse saves the Bureau before she can save Dylan, and even then, saving Dylan remains uncertain. Now, the main ending should be explained as a shift from personal to institutional identity. Jesse enters the oldest house as Jesse Faden, sister searching for brother. The service weapon names her director. At first, that title feels almost accidental. By the end, she accepts it. But not because the board says so. Because the Bureau needs someone who understands both sides, the need for containment and the cost of containment, the danger of the impossible and the danger of fearing it too much. The value of knowledge and the harm of secrecy. The power of the board and the need to question it, the humanity of subjects and the responsibility of researchers. Jesse's acceptance is the story's answer to control. True control is not domination. It is responsibility under uncertainty. The Bureau tried to contain the impossible by building walls around it. Jesse begins to understand that walls are not enough. You need humility. You need transparency within the institution. You need people like Emily. You need to question the board. You need to remember ordinary. You need to treat altered people as people, not only cases. You need to accept that some things will remain unknown. This is the difference between Trench and Jesse. Trench tried to preserve control. Jesse must redefine it. Now, the broader Remedy universe. Control fits into a wider world of altered world events, paranatural forces, and reality-bending art. The AWA expansion connected to Alan Wake. Later, Alan Wake 2 deepens that connection. But Control's own story stands on a different central idea. Alan Wake is about art rewriting reality. Control is about institutions trying to manage rewritten reality. Those are connected but distinct. Alan is the artist trapped by creation. Jesse is the director trapped by containment. Alan's danger is authorship without control. Jesse's danger is control without understanding. Together, they form two sides of the Remedy universe. But Control remains Jesse's story because only Jesse can transform the FBC from inside. Alan can influence narratives. The Bureau can classify events, but Jesse has to live with the consequences as director. Now, what should remain in the viewer's mind? Not simply that Jesse defeats the Hiss. Not simply that Dylan was her brother. Not simply that the Bureau studies weird objects. The final meaning is larger. Control is the story of an institution that believed the impossible could be made safe through secrecy, hierarchy, and containment. Then the impossible entered through the director himself. The Bureau's greatest threat did not come only from outside. It came through the cracks in its own system. Paranoia, isolation, overconfidence, exploitation, blind obedience to higher powers. The Hiss invasion reveals that the Bureau's mission is necessary, but its culture is broken. Jesse Faden becomes director because she is the one person who can see both truths. The impossible is real and dangerous. The Bureau is real and dangerous. Both must be confronted. That is the heart of Control. A gun chooses a director. A building refuses to stay still. A board speaks in broken divine bureaucracy. A scientist disappears into resonance. A brother becomes a prisoner of every system that claimed to understand him. A sister follows a voice through years of doubt and finally finds the place where the world hid the truth. But when she finds it, she does not burn it down. She takes responsibility for it. That is what makes Jesse different. She does not believe the Bureau is innocent. She does not believe the impossible is harmless. She does not believe the board deserves blind faith. She does not believe the past can be undone. But she chooses to lead anyway, because someone has to. That is the tragic burden of Control. The impossible cannot be ignored. But the people who contain it must never forget that containment is not ownership. A file is not truth. A redaction is not safety. A cell is not justice. A title is not wisdom. A weapon is not legitimacy. A board is not a god just because it speaks from above. And control is not control if you do not understand what it costs. The Federal Bureau of Control tried to contain the impossible. It built walls around altered objects. It buried case files under black ink. It turned children into candidates. It trusted rituals dressed as procedure. It made a home inside a living building and called that home headquarters. For a while, that was enough. Until the Hiss arrived. Until the director broke. Until the building sealed itself. Until the files were not enough. Until the chosen weapon needed a new hand. Until Jesse Faden walked through the door. And that is the final irony. The Bureau spent decades trying to control the impossible from the top down, but when the crisis came, it was saved by someone from the outside. Someone the Bureau had hurt. Someone it had failed to contain. Someone guided by a resonance it could study but never truly own. Jesse does not prove that the impossible can be controlled. She proves that it can be met, listened to, resisted, questioned, survived. And sometimes, if the person holding the service weapon remembers what the Bureau forgot, it can be protected from itself. Control is not the story of humanity mastering the unknown. It is the story of humanity being humbled by it. And Jessie's victory is not that she finally puts the impossible back in a box. Her victory is that she becomes director without believing the box was ever enough.